Hey everyone, one of my random hobbies is to come up with PC part lists. I don't know why. I'm not planning on building a new PC anytime soon, but hey ho, my random hobby is your gain, because here's 4 awesome PC builds for people on a budget. The first build starts at just $350, making it much cheaper than a console like the PS5. I also cover builds at $550, $850 and $1,000. Now I should point out that these builds don't include a keyboard, mouse or monitor because you might already have them. But also everyone's tastes are different. Some people like basic keyboards, other people want really fancy mechanical RGB ones. These builds also don't include Wi-Fi cards because some people, like me, run Ethernet cables to their PC, so they don't need Wi-Fi support. However, I'll discuss how to add Wi-Fi support later on in this video. Let's dive into the $350 build. At such a low price point, you'll end up needing to get a CPU with integrated graphics instead of spending a large chunk of your budget on a separate graphics card. It's technically possible to get an AMD build here with integrated graphics for just $300 if you go for the Ryzen 3200G. But that CPU is starting to show its age now, and the Intel Core i3 included in this build offers better performance all round at the $100-ish price point. I included the cheapest 16GB RAM and 500GB NVMe storage that I could find, but they are still good quality makes. You can always spend $5 to $10 more to get a brand like Corsair or Samsung though, if you prefer. The case is naturally fairly subjective, and some people dislike the look of the Q300L from Cooler Master, but I quite like it. There are lots of other options around $40 though, which is good. The PSU is a fairly solid option too, and I went with the 600W option instead of the cheaper 500W one to give you some extra power headroom in case you purchase a graphics card in the future. All in all, this is a pretty good build, especially because it's cheaper than a PS5 and an Xbox Series X. You should be able to run the majority of PC games at 1080p, full HD quality, with some tweaking of the graphical settings, but there's also future-proofing options here too. My next build is at the $550 price, and this comes with a 6-core CPU with full PCI Express Gen 4 support, meaning that you can go for faster NVMe drives and graphics cards. Although admittedly, the low budget here means that I've stuck to a cheaper RX 580 graphics card, which will deliver solid 1080p gaming, but it won't make extra full use of the PCI Express bandwidth of the CPU. Either way, this is still a solid build. I've gone for just 16GB of RAM, but for just $24 extra you could get 32GB, which is probably worth the upgrade if you have spare room in your budget. I should point out that some people recommend paying $40 less and getting the 6-core Ryzen 5500 instead, pointing to benchmarks that show only a marginal performance difference between the two. But the 5500 has half the L3 cache and doesn't support PCI Express Gen 4, so I definitely think that the 5600 is the better option here. Having a solid CPU and potentially being able to get 32GB of RAM means that when you upgrade the graphics card in the future, you'll immediately have a solid 1440p gaming rig. That's a pretty awesome position to be in when spending just $550 or so on a complete build. This motherboard doesn't include Wi-Fi support either, but I'll cover how to add this in at the end of the video. Next up, we have an $850 build, and at this price point you should expect a solid CPU, GPU and RAM. That's what this build delivers, with an 8-core Ryzen CPU, 32GB of RAM and the RX 6700 XT GPU. This should be able to handle games up to 1440p fairly easily. It's actually quite a powerful build for the budget. I actually weighed up the graphics card choice a lot here, because Nvidia offers some really great GPUs of course. However, many were still a bit too expensive for an $850 budget. For example, spending slightly more on a 4060 Ti but ended up with less VRAM didn't seem to make much sense to me. Plus I feel like the RX 6700 XT works out better for 1440p gaming than the 4060 Ti. If you disagree with my GPU choice here though, please let me know down in the comments. There's not always a right and wrong answer here. This build is a solid one, especially for just $850. The only real thing lacking is this still stuck on DDR4. This isn't a massive problem right now, but in a year or two, you'll probably expect any new build to start with DDR5 RAM. The last build to cover is the $1,000 build. I really wanted to squeeze an 8-core CPU in here, but because I went with DDR5 and an AM5 based system where prices are a bit higher across the board, I end up going for the Ryzen 7600. However, this is still a very solid CPU and outperforms the previous 5700X in many lower core benchmarks, making it especially good for gaming. This budget also meant that there was no way of getting one of AMD's 3D Vcache CPUs. You probably need a budget closer to $1,300 for that. But you can see that this build generally offers great performance. It has fairly good 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM, a powerful RX 6800 GPU that has 16 gigs of VRAM, and a semi-modular PSU to make cable management a little bit easier. I've also included 3 case fans here. These are RGB, but you can buy the non-RGB version for 50 cents less if you prefer to avoid blingy lights everywhere. The GPU in this build is solid performance that will handle 1440p gaming with ease and will tackle some 4K games too. Overall, it's pretty awesome just how much power you'll end up getting from this 1K build. I realise, however, that I haven't included any Nvidia GPUs in any of these 4 builds. But to be honest, the recent cards are just a bit too expensive for sub $1,000 builds, in my opinion. Especially considering that many of their cards don't always offer enough VRAM. Even their previous gen cards like the RTX 3070 are quite expensive, costing more than $500 in many cases, and spending half your budget or more than half your budget on a previous gen GPU with just 8 gigs of VRAM just doesn't make much sense to me. You then come to the current gen of Nvidia and you can only really get an RTX 4060 Ti within these budgets, and that's not a great card compared to something like the RX 6800 from AMD, which has more powerful compute performance and double the level of VRAM. I discussed VRAM in a previous video, but it's a bit frustrating to me that Nvidia seem unable or unwilling to offer good cards with good amounts of VRAM at good prices. I'm not an Nvidia hater or AMD fanboy though. If and when Nvidia cards make sense in any of these builds, I'll update the build list and put a comment down in the description. Before wrapping up, I need to discuss Wi-Fi capability. As mentioned earlier, many people prefer to run Ethernet cables to their PC for better internet stability. But if you can't do this, then you'll need to get some Wi-Fi capability somehow. You can purchase little USB dongles that give you Wi-Fi, but these can be a little bit unreliable at times. The other choices are to purchase a Wi-Fi enabled motherboard instead of the ones that I recommended, or go out and purchase a Wi-Fi PCI Express card. These plug inside your PC case and then you screw some Wi-Fi antennas onto the back of them. And that wraps up today's video. Did you agree with my recommended builds? Please let me know down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the thumbs up button. This tells the YouTube algorithm that more people should see this video. Please also subscribe to my channel if you're already, and thank you for watching.